Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're gathering here this evening, the Turrbal and Jagera people, their elders past, present and emerging. My name's Angela Goddard. I'm the Director of Griffith University Art Museum, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all this evening to this discussion between the two Glens, which besides us being very intrigued and interested in pairing the two Glens with two N's together, we think this will be a really compelling discussion. So we have Glenn Cooke, who is our curator of this exhibition with Heart and Hand, Art Pottery in Queensland, 1900 to 1950, who's, as you all know, has worked tirelessly for many decades on this particular period of Queensland's art history, as well as many other aspects of art history in his capacity, his long tenure as curator in various roles at the Queensland Art Gallery. Glenn is the great epitome of public service and what those particular roles in terms of being custodians of collections in public museums, the importance and significance of that kind of work in our institutions and guarding our history. And then we have the contemporary Glenn. Well, although
we're contemporary.
Yeah,
Glenn is contemporary.
Yeah, no, you're right, of course. As soon as I said that, I knew it was wrong. Anyway, so Glenn Barkley, who's based in Sydney, but has, of course, a national profile, very well respected curator and writer, but of course, more recently, a fantastic artist, especially in the ceramic medium, and a great interlocutor. So I'd like you all to join me in welcoming the Glens.
So do you want me to start?
You should start.
Okay, very good. Well, I think the connection between this exhibition and what Glenn does is hand building. And I said Mr. Harvey was teaching hand building techniques in Brisbane from 1916 till 1949 when he did, and I told Glenn he would thoroughly disapprove of what he did. Now, there was actually a great deal of sense in emphasising hand-building techniques because in the early decades of the 20th century there was a great deal of enthusiasm about wheel throwing, indeed, and also about the developmental potential of Queensland clay. And they were supposed to see a unification of that. And we did use Queensland clay in quite a degree, but wheel throwing never took up to a degree in the Harvey School. Because as Harvey wisely said, it would take at least 6 months training for anyone to learn to wheel throw properly. You would have actually needed your own wheel to actually do that. And because the simple fact there wasn't any art mark to make sure the products were suitably developed. As to Queensland clay, it was no experiment with a great deal of enthusiasm. I will give this example because I think it's really quite funny. My dear friend Agnes built a nice pot out of clay from Mount Tambourine. And do we have any potters in the audience? What degree of shrinkage do you expect when you have put a kiln, when you get things fired? 10. Yes, this pot that Agnes put in shrank by a third. So a pot that big ended up that big. And so that is the disadvantage of various Queensland clay. So essentially, most of the students in the technical college where Harvey taught use the white-bodied stone clay, which is the base clay on these pots over here, and they added bits and pieces of coloured Queensland clay for themselves. Now, the early
using it as a slip, just as a slip or a colorant?
Just as a slip in the first place. There are a few pieces up the upper end with a landscape scene, and the body was a landscape scene that was actually dark brown or gold with an overlying coloured glaze to give the twilight effect was actually popular in Australian painting at the time. These Queensland slip pieces are entirely distinctive to the Harvey School, and it is done in the double sgraffito technique, and it simply means that two scratchings. The white body clay is covered with coloured clay, then a different coloured clay, and then carved back to reveal the three different colour layers, then clear glaze over to show the effect. That is particularly Queensland clay, but within the Harvey School, Harvey had a series of exercises which introduced his students to the pinch building technique and slab building technique. Pinch building simply meant getting a bit of clay, shaping with your finger, then attaching it. So it's a very simple technique. Now, when it comes to hand building, there's one very distinct advantage to hand building. It requires virtually no equipment. You can actually start your work off at the college and take it home to finish it, bring it back to be fired and glazed. So you can actually develop a great repertoire of skill with a minimum of effort. One of the ladies called Marjorie Dunstan married and became a groom, went to live at Binnaburra, and she had to give up her pottery because the risk factor of getting from Binnaburra to Brisbane for firing on the very ratty roads was just too much for her. But I did meet her son when they had the tour from the Queensland Art Society, and the pieces are still highly valued in the family, which is a nice thing to do. But I should let Glenn talk about his hand building techniques.
Firstly, Glenn, I just want to say this is an amazing exhibition, and to Angela and her team, this is the second time I think in 6 months that I've been here, and both times the exhibitions I've seen here have just blown me away. Davida Allen last time, and then this show this time, and Glenn, amazing bit of curating. I feel when I'm around a curator like you, I'm in a bit of a panic because I can usually bamboozle most people, but I realise I can't bamboozle you, so like I'm a bit stuck. So I'm going to have to just like, I don't know,
Tell the
like
truth.
a clown,
Tell the truth.
yeah, or
Tell
tell the truth. I don't know. I think those graffito slip pots are some of the best things I've ever seen anywhere. They are so amazing. We were talking about this earlier. I think it's this thing where I can see De Morgan, the English potter and designer, sort of through them, but even further back you can see medieval slipware. You can see De Morgan's interest in Asian forms, and then somehow it's ended up in Brisbane. That is incredible. And I just sort of digressed a little bit from pottery. One of my favourite Australian artists is Robert McPherson, and the thing that I admire about him, but that I admire about Queensland art and culture in particular, and even someone like Ray Hughes, is the way that people cobble together their knowledge from these diverse sources. So did Harvey know, how did he actually have a sense of design and pattern? Was it from books, or was it from things
probably
he'd
would have been
seen?
books. No, he was familiar with the studio and the other design magazine at the time, but no, he was primarily in the first stages of woodcarver. And if you think of the woodcarving designs that were available in Europe in the late 19th century, it's all sort of neo-Renaissance and grotesque motifs. They tend to dominate in his carved works. And because he was a woodcarver, you will find that most of the decorative techniques have an alliance with carving. Carving, graffito, inlays, and so there's a strong, and also incising as well. There's not too many examples of incised decoration here, but it was quite common. So yes, his wood carving did sort of define the types of decoration he chose to use, and his students. And
they didn't do any coiling, is that the...
No coiling at all.
Was coiling frowned upon?
Well, it was a basic technique which Harvey never taught except to his children's students in the 40s. I guess Harvey didn't see the need for teaching because he had developed his own methods quite quickly, but In Warwick, Charles Astley also did some experimental coil build pieces in the 20s. So there was a little bit about, it was known, but it was not a major part of the art scene in Queensland.
Because maybe, we'll just sort of whiz through a few slides. So I tend to coil build, nearly all coil build. There's things that are sort of changing at the moment, but the reason why I find this work interesting in this show is a lot of the sort of motifs are similar. And Glenn and I have this in common. It could be something about retired curators or lapsed curators, like lapsed Catholics. We're both keen gardeners, and a lot of my forms come from things in the garden, like looking at certain shapes and leaf shapes, but also the other thing too is about contrast, so the matte against the gloss and different shapes up against one another, that sort of things that you take from the garden. I like this idea that when you're gardening, we have a 4-acre garden in Berry, which I was explaining is like, there's a lot of mowing. But sometimes you're looking at the landscape and sometimes you're looking at something in the garden about that big. And if you can bring that quality to your pots, I'd be happy with that. And I do quite often, after I fire them, spend hours just looking at them. Coiling is sort of pottery for idiots. I don't know anything. My pottery skills are very sort of down here. I do teach it, funnily enough, and I sort of admit to the students I do. And just as an aside, when I first started teaching, I had a meltdown because on the first day I had to teach them slab rolling, and I never ever used the slab rolling machine. And I was crying, and I said to my wife, "These people, I can't teach these people. I don't know anything, you know." And then I went there and I just admitted it to them and said, "Oh, look, I can't do this, but it can't be that hard, can it? So let's just do it together." And so we did it together and it worked out. And then funnily enough, once I did it, I went, "Oh, I could save a bit of time with this slab rolling." And so these are all coil built, but on the left, you'll see the base. And this is where I think my sort of love of pottery comes from in particular. The base was thrown by my mother-in-law, Lynn Havilar. And we were talking about throwing before. Funnily enough, if I taught myself how to throw, I'd want to make really simple things, not complicated things, because I often want these bases. So that is a chuck. Does anyone know? I know there's some potters here. Do you know a chuck? It's used in turning. So if you throw a big round pot, when you flip it over to turn it, you can't put it on the round surface, so you put it in the chuck. And Lynn, my mother-in-law, she doesn't throw anymore, but when she stopped, she had all these chucks in the studio, which I fired and then turned into bases because I quite liked the formality of that chuck against my pot. But the thing I love about this show is the colour. The colour is that green. It's like that's my thing. I have a glazed sponsor, by the way, Northcote Pottery Supplies. They make amazing glazes, and that green is sort of just a fantastic thing. So my work is sort of anchored in my mother-in-law's practice, which, if you saw my mother-in-law's work, which was production pots, she was one of these brown pot makers, very much of the sort of Bernard Leach school. Not as interesting as this, I wouldn't think, but incredibly productive and an incredible maker with this amazing muscle memory. If you gave her a ball of clay and you turned around, she would have thrown a bowl, instantly, and so when I was working in her studio, I found all of these labels, which were the labels that you still see now in op shops. It's like her production has hit the op shop in a big way. But we will see a show of that type of work like this type of work in 30 or 40 years, because it will, it's sort of at the bottom, but it gets picked up again. They were the labels that she made for all of these different spices and things that you'd have a canister with a big cork plug in it. And I found them in the studio and I used them. That work is now in Wollongong City Gallery collection. But the best thing that happened, and we can say this, this was shown in Adelaide at the Art Gallery of South Australia, and all of those labels, they're on nails. So I put a hole in the pot, fired the pot, then put the nail back in and put the label on there hanging off the nail. During the installation, one of the preps broke one of them, but he didn't tell anybody. And he took it out the back and glued it back together, which I thought was the best thing that could have happened, because that's what you would do if it was in your house.
Yeah.
Like the umbrella stand, which I love. I love that it is worn, and I love the idea that it was broke. He went and broke it and he fixed it, which is really bad. And and he came up to me sort of during the install and went, "I broke this, but I fixed it." Like, sort of gave it to me, and someone else could have freaked out, whereas I just went, "Oh, thank you so much," and put it on the work, and it's still there. And then these are collages that I make using sort of the garden motifs, but we could maybe talk about collecting.
Yeah, okay.
And my practice as a potter is very tied into my practice as a curator. And Glenn, I just wanted to ask you maybe about how you feel now having been a curator at Quang and going in there and seeing the way ceramics are displayed. If you just wanted to talk a little bit about it. I think it's really positive the way ceramics is there, but as we discussed earlier, when you sort of start to think about what isn't there,
well, I guess...
And you would have seen some big shifts across your career.
Yeah. Well, it's actually, dare I say, the hierarchy of the arts is manifested very clearly. The former director, Tony Elwood, did actually have an interest in decorative arts, which is not very much evident in the public collections throughout Australia. The National Gallery of Victoria is an exception because it has such an outstanding decorative arts collection. But the few ceramic pieces on display are those linked to artists, as in the Boyds or the Purcell, or Anne Dangar, who has achieved sort of international fame, or Aboriginal potters. And this is where the hand building comes in again. I was going to talk about the shift in techniques. We had hand building manifest in Queensland, then for generations wheel throwing had taken place. If you...
Do you want to skip through?
No. Well, a lot of pots there. This is by a guy called Stephen Bowers from Adelaide. I think it's actually a pretty special piece. And
were you there when that work was purchased? Yeah.
And
you're in a safe space. If you want to claim it, I'm happy. I claim it all the time.
Yeah. So. And that was thrown by Mark Heidenreich. He's actually decorator, but again, it requires an enormous amount of skill to be able to throw a pot to that size and scale and sort of then get it fired. So huge. That work could easily be on display because it is actually a superb piece, even in any terms. But it's not. But if we go a bit further on, these aren't in particular order. I hope. Go back. Oops. Okay. That is the type of pot that is actually has a strong connection now but the connection is indigenous. It is actually, in my opinion, a naive work. I don't actually call your work naive, but it is in naive pottery, and this is the absolute antithesis of that piece, which is Gwyn Hanson Piggott. And Gwyn has the ultimate refinement in her work and the ultimate wheel throwing, I would say, but she has it as acknowledgement to Morandi in her little installations. And I did an exhibition on Gwyn quite a few years ago now, and she was saying, "Oh yes, you can take a piece out and use it, put it back." And I said, "Gwyn, what happens if something's broken?" "Oh, that would be a tragedy." So even though these look to be used. Actually, Damon Moon, who used to be a sort of craft potter, now is actually back to being a production potter in Adelaide. He describes them as a simulacra of pottery because it looks like pottery, but it's not meant to be pottery.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it looks to be useful, it is not useful.
Have you ever used one?
Well, I didn't know Cliff Winhanson pretty good because I actually don't.
But when you worked with her, did you ever?
Well,
I heard that story that you would go to her house and she had this sort of cup collection that you could go through.
Yeah, but they weren't installation pieces. Sort of once it's put into a context like this, it actually takes on quite different value. A cup in your hand is not the same as a cup on display in a museum. I mentioned wheel throwing. This is by Carl McConnell, sort of one of the leading lights in art pottery in Queensland, studio pottery in Queensland. Milton Moon. For some strange reason, I tried to flog these from the Queensland Art Gallery site this afternoon. There is not an image of the 23 Milton Moon pots in their collection. So this is from his Bush Pattern series from the 80s, which I was flogged off eBay. You can buy it for $700 if you like, which is a bargain because it's 37 inches tall. That's a big bit. And this is also now the acceptable face of hand building pottery. It is by artists whose name I can't remember, but it is again. It's the simulacra of pottery because these are pieces reference the trade in blue and white pottery that was to Europe. And even now, if you go along to very gifty shoppers, you'll probably find blue and white watering cans, which were pretty well useless. But all these pieces, like the rolling pin, the iron, have been separated from their useful context into making an artwork. But I'm still in favour of having what you can use. And there's nothing else I'm going to care. And we go back to this one here, which is quite a bizarre piece. Now, we were talking about curators and sort of acquiring things for the Queensland Art Gallery, and dare I say, most of the directors I've worked with had very, very little interest in so-called decorative arts. And does anyone recognise what this piece might be? Who the artist is?
I know who it is.
No, you're in. Well, come on, another taker. There was a big exhibition of work at the Queensland Art Gallery a year or two ago.
Is it English?
No, it's American.
Domain.
Cindy Sherman, yeah.
But it's French, isn't it?
It's Limoges porcelain, yeah. And that was one of those strange things where it actually acquired without any difficulty. So I can't believe this, because it sort of transgresses the idea of pottery. This is actually a reproduction of Serf tureen made by one of the French kings, whoever had Madame Pompadour as his mistress, because we have Cindy Sherman as Madame Pompadour, née Poisson. And if you look carefully, you will see scattered around the decoration tiny little fish. So it is a commercially produced production, a replica of a period piece with a posed portrait, a printed portrait of Cindy Sherman. I think you would describe this piece as pretty hybrid. But that is just a little bit of a curatorial, you might say, curatorial whinging. But everything's up for grabs, unfortunately.
But it is interesting. In New South Wales, at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, there's a curator of international art who has seen that ceramics has got this high visibility in the contemporary art world now internationally. So he's just bought Ron Nagel, Betty Woodman, Arlene Schecht, like really incredible things using the international fund, Australian art is not buying contemporary ceramics at all. Yeah, and I mean the Andanga's one example where they're back buying, which I think is really important, but I think they're going to be back buying for a long time to come.
They haven't bought anything apart from the Gwyneth's Priggett you mentioned for literally 50 years. So I think they're going to have to find a generous donor. Now, get back to you.
Okay, flick back, because where were we? We were talking about being a curator. That's not the greatest shot, but that's a show that I did at the National Art School called Turn, 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 which celebrated 50 years of the ceramics school at NAS.
And these artists from their collection?
From their collection, but also artists who studied at NAS. So that was under Peter Rushforth, he was the person who established the school. And so what we did was we showed, I think, 12 artists in a bit of depth, and then this space, we used the furniture out of the ceramic studio and then just put these pots in there. I think there was about 100 artists in there, in that space. Have you noticed, Glenn, that ceramicists are the worst touchers of all time?
Yep.
They pick stuff up,
Yep.
they tap it, they'll put their hands in it, they'll do everything.
So
That
while
was
they're
not mild panic, extreme panic while that show was on, just terror.
Well, that is again the hierarchy of the arts, because by looking at something you only engage one of your senses. The tactile quality, which is absolutely part of ceramics, and that's why you can't touch anything here, is something which I instinctively do. But yeah, it's the tyranny of the eye, I call it. But yeah, I could explain to it. I'd have to retrain myself from the sneaky touch.
Yeah, I've been really good here actually. I've sort of put my hand out, but then and I did recently see a show of Kirsten Quaylo and Julie Blyfield in Melbourne, where they collaborated together and they made a few of these sort of ginger jar and potpourri sort of shapes with Julie made the tops. And I went in there and there was nobody in the gallery and I said, look, do you mind if I touch them? And they said, no, it's okay. So they are sort of activated once you touch them. Pottery, yeah, I'm desperate to pull the lids off those. But I was informed that they are stuck down.
Yeah, they're stuck down.
I'm a curator, yeah, I better be safe.
Yeah, they're still tucked down.
And then these are just examples of sort of exhibitions. I think that
These are Mexican, are they?
these are Mexican in the Museum of Mexican Folk Art. They're sort of elaborate candelabra. I've been really lucky as a curator, and Glenn, I'm not sure what they thought about travel when you were at the Queensland Art Gallery, but you did get about travel. You get around much.
I'm not sure I understood the word.
Yeah. Well, at the MCA, so I was the senior curator at the MCA, so I wasn't sort of dabbling, but they would put you on these crazy trips. And the MCA, whenever you read MCA marketing, so we can say this is always like, we don't have any money. We have to raise all of our money. So when you go on a trip, it'd be like, okay, you can see the person that you need to see, there's a day, and then you've got 3 days to see the whole of New York. So you would run like crazy to see as much as you could. And so I was sort of ramming all this stuff into my brain. This is later on a trip of my own where we went to Mexico to a wedding. It was the most amazing trip. But you do build up this database that when you become an artist, it's like, oh, you filed away all this sort of rubbish. I think of art sometimes as like sifting through a compost pile. And you have all these bins and certain things are sort of breaking down. I think gardening is a perfect analogy for curating and for art making. So you have all these things sort of breaking down at certain stages and you sort of move them from bin to bin until you get to the refined stuff at the end. So this is sort of my thinking process, but just to sort of give you a sense of where things come from and to be a bit ridiculous. This is in Miami. this is from a show I had in Miami in January called I Know It's Just No Use was the name of the show. And it comes from a Gloria Estefan song. Do people, the Miami Sound Machine. I think if you're in Miami, you have to sort of quote her. So these are big wall pieces I make, and out of a sense of this thing about the medium sort of interests me, Glenn, what you're saying is I make these sometimes because I think just making pots isn't enough. And I need to make something a bit more substantial because people just won't look at pots, or I won't be a real contemporary artist unless I make these big wall things.
Well, I'm glad you realise that.
Yeah. Painting's where the big money is, apparently, if anyone's looking for it.
Everywhere. I was actually highly amused. One of the Indigenous ladies from the Telstra Awards was well noted as a basket weaver, which you get for small amounts of money. She translated the weaving, decorative weaving style onto a canvas and it was $3,000.
Yeah.
So, money's worth it. And there's also another character. I remember seeing an exhibition by Gwyn Hansen Pickett at, oh God, what's the name of the gallery? Mother and Son in Richmond. Can't think of it anyway. But it had an exhibition of Gwyn Hansen Pickett's there. Was that?
Christine Abraham.
Yeah. And had an exhibition of installation work by Gwyn Hansen Pickett for about $2,000 for the whole piece. And behind his desk was a modern-sized painting by Michael Johnson for $30,000. Gwyn Hansen Pickett has an international reputation. Michael Johnson is unknown outside pretty well Melbourne.
Sydney, maybe.
Yeah.
And that's a strange noise. Is that me?
It seems to be okay.
These are pots that I make, and look, this is the one that really would have upset Mr. Harvey, I think, because it uses room temperature glazing. Do you know what that is?
No.
Paint.
Yeah.
It's expensive paint though.
Yeah.
It's flash, which is a French paint, which has got this really high pigment content, so they sort of strobe. And I sort of took that from Ken Price. That was a thing that Ken Price, the American potter, used to say. He'd say, oh, it's room temperature glazing, because then people would just get confused. But he used automotive sprays and things as well. But people do ask me, this is this whole thing about function, are they waterproof? Well, they're not waterproof because they're fired to earthenware, so they're always going to be porous. But you could put a stick in it or something.
And you can put flowers in these, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I do say to people, if you do want to use it, you could put a vase inside it and use the vase. I really like the idea of it being used because there is, I think, the most remarkable thing in the show, the Egyptian umbrella pot.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it was used as an umbrella stand. I think that's really great. I have a Michael Cardew pot at home that I use to put receipts in. And I think it's sort of criminal, but at least I'm using it.
You know where the receipts are?
Yeah. They're in that expensive pot.
Yeah.
And one of the first really great sales that I made was to Val and Michael Gregg, who are collectors in Sydney, who some of you might know. I know there's some collectors here, amazing collectors of ceramics. And when Val bought it, she said, I already know what flowers I'm going to put in it, and that just made my heart sort of sing that she was going to do that. I want people to use them, but the problem is they become too expensive, and then people freak out.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot to ask you, how did your show in Miami go?
Went okay. I paid for the trip.
Okay.
Miami's an interesting place if you want to go. It's not a place you might think of going, but quite a remarkable place. And I was in a show in Boca Raton
Okay.
with about George Orr. Do you know the American mad potter of Biloxi? So there was a group of George Orr's works and then a group of artists that Garth Clark, the American writer and curator, sort of put together that he thought were responses to all, which included those two works, I think.
Well, that's quite flattering.
It was really flattering. It was so flattering. America is a weird place. If you get out of New York and LA, which aren't, it's not America. Yeah. And I don't drive either, so I'm always on public transport. And only the poor catch public transport in America. And so I went to Boca Raton on this train that just dropped me in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea how to get to the gallery. And I just luckily looked in this car park, and there was a taxi sort of over where those buildings were, so I just sort of ran towards the taxi. And I said, I'm going to the art gallery. And he went, I think I know where it is. And he dropped me off. I went into the gallery. I saw my work across the room, because like all artists, you just want to see your own work. And I had been joking to someone that Betty Woodman, who's an artist that I love, I said to a friend of mine, Betty Woodman's in the show. And they said, you'll probably just be an ashtray. And anyway, there was a gigantic Betty Woodman on the back wall, and my work was next to it. And there were these young women looking at my work. I ran up to them and I went, that's mine! And then sort of scurried away, and they're sort of, oh, really? And so these are now sort of new installations that I've been doing using wallpaper. But again, it comes back to this idea of like, I can't just show the pots. And plus I have this thing called horror vacui, a fear of empty space. So I feel like I need to fill the whole space. So these are collages which are then turned into prints, which are turned into wallpaper, but which cover the walls. And these, I'm happy to say, look, there's a pointer on this thing if I do that. Oh, this is like I'm at the Opera House, projecting the... I'm wrecking my own pot. That's, how much is it? $13 million. This pot's just been bought by the National Gallery of Australia, which is really great. I think the next... So they're just sort of details of the pots. But I use text quite a lot. So that's from a text by a poem by Auden called Archaeology. This is from a poem by Philip Larkin called An Arundel Tomb. I don't know, do you know that poem, Glenn? Do you read much poetry?
No.
Do you know Larkin's
I know Larkin.
Such a bitter sort of poet, whereas that's a beautiful poem about love. And then this is text by Joni Mitchell, who I think is one of the few sort of contemporary artists who's actually tackled getting old with any sort of intelligence. She's not Keith Richards, that's for sure. And then this is my
tribute to
homage.
Queen
Yeah. But this, I'm intrigued by these, and there's something that you said about speed and how Harvey sort of teaching the students almost said, there's no time for you to be throwers, but I can teach you how to do this other thing quickly. So that's very much a part of them, isn't it?
It is very much a part of it. Sort of, in the book I actually make a quote by Nancy Hemming from like 1946, and she was describing she'd made about 20 pieces of pot emblems to Harvey's instruction, and it was a very pleasant hobby for her, and no particular skill was required. Well, that was because after teaching for 30 odd years, Harvey had his method of instruction down to such a fine tone that you could produce something which was pretty bloody good. It required a great deal of ineptitude to stuff it up. So the standard of the piece is actually really quite remarkable. If you see the pieces produced by students as students, you will probably see there was a little bit of lessening in attitude, but just the physical time, a lot of this work was produced during the Depression. And Harvey had his salary to fall back on, but a lot of these ladies were living on the smell of an oily rag, and so if you were teaching something, you had to offer your student encouragement. You could say, bad, do it again. So some of the work by student is not the best, but again, some is exceptional.
And how would they pay for the classes?
About a shilling a lesson. It was, but again, a shilling doesn't sound much, but it probably was a substantial amount of money in its time. And a lot of these pots would have been sold for 2 and 3 guineas, which doesn't sound much, but it would have been a substantial amount of money in its own time again.
And was that the goal, do you think, of the students, or were they doing it for?
Well, there are quite a large number of students in the field that I've documented over the years. During the 20s, the domestic science students were required to take a bit of pottery. So in that year there was something like 140 students who would, and there would have been 140 students going through the basic exercises, and they may not have done anything much further after that. But the people who progressed upon further the exercise were generally committed to a couple of years of work, and so they had all the skills required. But if you look at that piece over there, the one on the end by Velma Baxter, that is masterly work. With it's pierced and carved and then glazed, so it's masterly work. Again, it's the best part has had a little introduction, and I spoke to Glenn before about, can you imagine the tragedy when if something you put all that work into crack through in the kiln, it'll be pretty devastating. In fact, one of the ladies I heard mention of had it, and again, all, as you know, before the work's fired, they're pretty fragile. Once they're fired, they're pretty last forever. A kiln broke and a shop broke, and so did her entire year's production. It rather sort of diminished her enthusiasm.
And were they firing with gas or?
No, at Stone's Potter would have been coal fire.
Yeah.
And the comments been made on the glazes because they're all fired in saggers. Do people know what saggers are? Haven't you explained to people what saggers are?
Saggers are usually made out of clay, and the piece that they're firing is put into the sagger to protect it from probably ash or the flow of the flame.
And then why weren't saggers used in the 60s and 70s? Why weren't they used?
Why weren't they used? Because they wanted to have some of that flame or ash.
The cult of the kiln.
Yeah. That was the big shift, from total control of what was being done, well, as far as you could, then to in happenstance of the kiln. And now again, it's actually the people who produce pottery look for the total control of what they get. They're not interested in anything accidental.
I've made work about that one.
Okay.
This is one of my favourite spaces in the world and collections. It's the Waterston Bequest at the British Museum. Do you know you're familiar with this? The Rothschild collection, which he donated, I think, in the early part of the 20th century. And the curiosities, which is these sort of things. This is a coco de Moor, a big nut, which has been cut and turned into a jug. And these sort of shell cameos. But they may not look anything more. Maybe this is a better example. That's my Instagram account. You can see the shells, obviously. So I have been sort of changing my work a bit from coiling to using stamps, because I did, after I used the slab roller with the students, I sort of went, I need to make some things a bit quicker, because my work, you can imagine these do take a bit of time. But time's important, that's what.
You're never going to be production potter.
Oh, you never know. That's why I love these, because time is built into them. I think once you explain that thing about time, it actually makes them even more intriguing to me, that you can get to this really skillful level, but quickly. Like, he managed to bring the students up to that level.
You can't do these quickly.
Yeah, but within 6 months,
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
But the individual works you can't make quickly.
Yeah, but they look really, that looks like something that's been, if one of my students came up with that, after 6 months, I'd be amazed.
Well,
Yeah.
this was probably a bit longer than 6 months, yeah.
So I started to use the slab roller to make these forms, which I have this theory, which Leanne Rosler actually told me, the designer, about garlic bread and about how to make money if you own a restaurant, is you make it from garlic bread. You don't make it from main meals.
Probably true.
It is, I'm pretty sure it is true, because it was the guy who owned the Summit restaurant once gave a talk that Leanne was at and said, okay, I'll tell you how to make money. He said, I bought my 6 Mercedes from garlic bread. I didn't buy it from the mains. Yeah. He said, but the thing is the garlic bread is tasty.
Yeah.
You like making it, and you're not underselling yourself, because it's really great garlic bread, but the markup between the making and the selling is so big that it's how you maximise your profit. So I sort of like this garlic bread theory, and I tell people, you need a garlic bread line. I say to my students, you've got to think about this garlic bread idea. And so I thought I'd do this as my garlic bread. But what happened was I started to use the slab roller and just rolling out little slabs to make this is a revelation to me, this show. This is, these are probably out of copyright too, so I'm in the clear.
You are actually, they are.
Yeah. And so I started to make these slab forms, and then I think the first one I made was this one. And then I filled it with those blue holes. Can you see all the blue holes? And then once I'd done that, I started to put in even tinier holes between the blue holes. So my garlic bread theory was sort of destroyed, because they ended up taking longer than the other ones, but they're only this big. And so then I had these stamps, and I thought, well, I'm going to just start making pots out of these stamps, which I've been using in my bigger pots. So you can see that's William Morris's face. So William Morris sort of turns up in this show as well. And I like you can stick William Morris's face sort of there, and all of a sudden you've opened up this whole sort of dialogue with the arts and crafts movement. But with this work, why I say this is sort of related to the cult of the kiln, I've had a few issues with older men who don't like my work for one reason or another. I have no skill, is the first thing. I'm not interested in that sort of cult of the kiln, even though I really admire it, and I do appreciate work that's made like that. And there was some sort of idea that myself and a couple of others, we were almost like demonic figures in the craft world. So we were getting criticised all the time and really attacked on social media. But when other people tell me, mainly young women and women, they tell me what they copped. What I copped was nothing. Yeah, it's like 0. Anyway, at first I was upset, and then I thought, well, I'll just get their words and I'll put them on my pots. And the best sale I ever made was when I sold those pots using their words. Yeah. But anyway, the funny thing is when I tend to meet these older guys, and I'm an older white guy as well, we tend to get on. Like we're sort of the same. Like we're God's chosen people, and we run everything. And we're having a moment now where you think you're in charge, but we'll be back in the driver's seat before too long. We're still in the driver's seat. But I went to this very famous woodfirer's place, and he makes these really beautiful forms. And there's this affectation within the woodfiring world to stick shells on things, which is used for wadding. Yeah. So do you know, if you fire a big wood kiln, you stack it with the pots, and then between the pots you put shells. But when it fires, the shell sort of leaves an impression on the pot. So you'll see little shell spots like this.
And they disintegrate.
Yeah, but it leaves these quite beautiful marks. But it's this whole thing, there's not the sagger, and it's like, oh, that was at the back near the tunnel, and that was like up the front near the, fire hole, and that was sort of, and I was here for 2 days, and we made a giant soup, and we were drunk, which I find sort of amusing. But he showed me the shell thing, and he went, I invented that. And I went, no, you didn't, but it's really good that you think that you did. And so now I started making shell moulds, And I have an assistant, Michelle, who works with me, and every time I stamp out the shell, I go to her, I invented that.
Now, I did ask you about slip casting. Would you ever go down that road?
I'd slip cast pieces of things, I think. I think I'd work with someone to make the moulds, or I'd find the moulds, but I do like sprigging. So I do sort of, I have got plaster moulds that I've found and that people have given me, but I tend to just push the clay into it. I don't slip cast it. And I can get the effect that I want, but I quite often think I wouldn't mind doing that to make a garlic bread line.
Yeah.
I think you can go pretty fast if you do that.
You can do it quite fast, yes.
Yeah. And I'm lucky in that I do teach, and the students are an endless source of information to me. I don't know what I'm telling them, but it's like I learn a lot from them. And it's good with other teachers there who are highly skilled, who are teaching slip casting, to see what they're up to, because you can just sort of duck into the other studio and there's some really great things. And I sometimes want to steal the moulds. And, yeah.
Well, I just meant, you've heard of Stephen Baxter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a whole lot of moulds that
His mother was a hobby craft teacher.
Yeah.
And so he does strange things with his moulds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really love op shopping, which I think is part of the reason why I love these as well, that you sort of imagine that you might find one. But are those days over, do you think?
Are those days over at the op shops?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows something going on in op shops.
Everyone, I think they're recognisable.
So did Brisbane.
But I used to collect Martin Boyd ceramics from the 50s, and I started buying it when it was really cheap, and then all of a sudden it just started getting more and more and more and more expensive, until eventually I just had to stop because I was spending all my money on it. But occasionally I'll look around at markets, and the market for that stuff sort of collapsed.
Yeah.
But when I was in Tamworth, at the Tamworth Textiles Triennale, there was a big fete on the day after the opening, and I found the best piece of Martin Boyd pottery I've ever found for $3. A big ginger jar with the lid, no chips. Yeah.
Wow.
I'd never seen one
Yeah.
apart from was $3.
Give you $6
No. I'm keeping that one, Bruce. I am giving a lot of that stuff away, but that one I'm keeping. Yeah. And then, funnily enough, this friend of mine collects that green Wedgwood vine leaf plates.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the other artists sort of came up to me and went, "Look what I found," and like opened up a bag, and there was about 10 of them in the bag for like $1 each.
Yeah.
So it happens, yeah, but it's rare.
Rare.
So is that a market that you used to go to, op shops?
I've found harvesting in op shops over the years, but only 2 or 3 pieces ever.
But these pieces are actually quite rare. Even though there's a lot of them out there, the best pieces are rare, and there was actually limited production. So I have to tell people that even though it looks a lot here, they're actually still pretty rare. It's not commercial production by any stretch of the imagination.
Is this a good time to open up to more questions?
So how do you view the pots that are actually made by artists like Gary Shee and William Robinson and things like that?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, sort of, William Robinson is a decorator. Sort of, his pieces are made by Errol Barnes, and it went through a whole Ray Hughes went through a whole series of his stables by decorating up his artist, stable artist, decorate pot. And did you decorate some, Michael?
Oh, yeah.
See? Yeah. So it was a general thing that Ray had this brilliant idea to get his artist decorating some work beautifully successfully.
With William, he started painting with the glaze on dishes and so forth, which had been thrown by Errol. But then he progressed to those quite elaborate seascapes, which were very model and involved many figurines, which created quite very
And then I saw a beautiful Joe Furlonger on Instagram today that looked as though he was there when the potter made the pot, because there was this beautiful correlation between the decoration and the pot, or whether he just got it, he just managed to
That
get
is
it.
when the pots work best. No,
Yeah.
sort of Bill Robinson, when he has his strange perspective, work beautifully when you're going around the pot, or someone like a Joe Furlonger work, which they fit the shape beautifully. They're the most effective one, because the artist responds to the work and to the shape. So yeah, it's an integration work.
Joe spends a lot of time with earls and still. In fact, he goes down there and he labours on the side of the hill helping landscape the property, because the earl sites are given up for making pottery, and now runs a tourist destination on the top of the mountain there, where he encourages Taiwanese people to come and view clothings. So Joe's putting his shoulder in his early 60s with Errol, who's still incredibly fit and moving these huge boulders around in his early 70s.
Depends on the nature of the collaboration. I think Brett Whiteley's pots are pretty awful. They're not as they are so decorative. He's just really.
And John Olsen's pots, where I think they're pretty good too, because he has that sensitivity to the shape.
Yeah.
Just on that same theme, what's fascinating sometimes is that the artist's work is so significantly more valuable in an auction environment to the artwork versus the pottery.
Absolutely.
You've seen that. I saw that recently with a piece of wood, and I just went, wow, 1,000 times more for a piece of painting as opposed to a significant bit of pottery.
And I think some of his pots are better than the paintings. Yeah, some of Boyd's, those big terracotta things that he did, there's one at the Art Gallery New South Wales, they're amazing. I'd have one of them over a painting any day. And that Percival casserole dish, you can see that in Quaig now. That's just a terrific work. But they were sort of different again, weren't they? Because they were enmeshed in pottery from day one. They sort of was in their bones almost.
It was in the pottery, yeah, that they became, again, like they discovered that it's worth the while to produce paintings rather than pots.
But they used that as a sideline.
Yeah,
That's probably how they made money for
how they kept alive, yes.
Yeah. So they're a slightly different case again.
Slightly different category, yeah.
Potter, I don't know, maybe it is because I've had this curatorial career and I'm a bit of a realist, but as a ceramicist, and in all jokes aside, you do sort of think, where is my market going to top out at? Because pottery is still an oddity to most collectors. But I think what's happened is collectors in Australia go to all these international art fairs and they see ceramics everywhere, and then when they come back to Australia they think, oh well, yeah, I saw this elsewhere and maybe I can buy it, but that market might top out at a certain level.
But if you
and at a certain price point as well.
But if you have international exposure, the art market in Australia is so vast and there are just so many levels.
Yeah, but that's so much luck involved that might happen. Yeah. But you never know. Instagram's changed everything, so if you're not on Instagram, get on Instagram. It really has. There's a global market all of a sudden has opened up that never existed before. I know there's a potter here in Brisbane who has got sort of international clientele just through the quality of her Instagram account, and her work is amazing.
Who's
That's got to get back to that. I'm not sure if I should say.
It's going to show on right now.
There you go.
Okay.
It's extraordinary that you note that in the antique environment as well. All those antique shops now have got Instagram accounts, and bang, people are buying stuff online. They don't even go to the shop.
But ceramics, that whole sort of brown pot movement, sort of post World War II through to sort of the beginning of the 21st century, that's going to collapse, I think, that market. And
it already has.
Yeah, the secondary market for that material, say at Shapiro's in Sydney, if you go and buy, you can buy buy really amazing things for no money at all.
Well,
Yeah.
the secondary market has. Well, the secondary market in sort of art pottery has barely begun anyway.
Yeah.
And so the secondary market in the sort of classic sort of Legion style has barely begun.
And what's the market for a Harvey wood carving as compared to?
Considerably more because there are fewer of them. And unless they're signed, well, Harvey's wood carving, his best wood carving is actually his head plaques, which are quite beautiful. And I've not been in the market for Harvey wood plaques, but they're pretty expensive. But no, I was making a comment about the Maud O'Reilly Kookaburra, which is a multiple. It costs more to get a Maud O'Reilly multiple Kookaburra than you can buy original Harvey work for. So it's a bit strange, the market. But people like Kookaburras.
Are there any more questions?
Can I ask what family are here whose pieces?
Family members, put your
Yeah.
hands up of Harvey School potters. It's just you, Jen. Yeah.
Just the one.
A descendant with work still in the, and that's probably why you don't see them in op shops so much. They're probably still in people's houses, do you think?
They can be if they're valued. Like I mentioned, these Marjorie Dunstan's son, who's a groom. The works are valued amongst the family. What's her name? Marjorie Close. The works are valued in the family, and the grandson in Adelaide has a wonderful collection. And like Florence Bland, the works are valued in the collection. And Mary Lawrence's work is valued amongst the family, but for what's a generation, I'm not sure, because most of the younger generations are not interested in possessions. So things might come out shortly.
Just on that theme, Angela, that on your opening night, my sister took a photo and posted on Instagram, and one of her friends went, "Wow, I recognise those pots," and I shared this with Glenn, but
She hasn't got back to me.
So in this house somewhere in regional Queensland, there's the family, which one?
A cupboard full of them.
Yes, well, there's a wall full of them, of all these things that she grew up with. Said, I remember all these, and just quite excited to think that there's a connection here to such a significant exhibit with her grandmother, great grandmother.
Garth Clark, who I mentioned before, was in Australia a couple of years ago. There's a very famous English potter called William State Murray, do you know? So he's sort of the parallel to Bernard Leach, and he had written an article about William State Murray somewhere, and someone in regional New South Wales saw the article and got in touch with him and said, "I'm his grand niece. You should come to my house next time you're in Australia, because there's not much work." Because he moved to Nairobi, I think in the 30s, and he stopped making things, and he basically left his collection to this woman's father or something, and it's in Cowra or somewhere, and Garth Clark's gone there, and the house is full of them. Yeah, which is amazing what is out there.
But they're the wonderful stories that give you encouragement.
Yeah, you gotta live the dream.
Can I just say one thing? My mother went to L.J. Harvey Ceramics, but only for 1 year, because she wouldn't do as she was told. So we had a few things of my aunt's and my mother's work, but there was a format that we have at home, but she was there for 1 year, so she wasn't a good person.
She didn't like decorating. She liked simple things.
Well, I mean, I think we've all enjoyed this beautiful exhibition. We have Glenn's wisdom and Timothy's and Diane's wisdom in the catalogue in order to get the kind of historical context of the period. But to kind of bring the works alive and to talk about the contemporary context of ceramic making and to draw some of these very interesting parallels. It's just been fantastic to listen to this discussion. So I hope you'll all join with me in thanking the two Glens.